In this module, we're going to look at troubleshooting and recovery in Windows 10. There are going to, of course, be certain times where you do experience problems, and knowing what to do in those times is very important, and knowing how to do it. So we're primarily going to be dealing with the different tools that we use. In this section, we're going to start just kind of looking at managing devices and drivers, what tools do we have at our disposal, and what happens if a driver fails, or we need to update a driver, roll back a driver. We'll go through all of those things, and then we'll also be talking about recovering files, some of the changes that were present in Windows 8, but are also present now in Windows 10 on how we do backups. There's some differences there, predominantly with the file history utility and how it kind of keeps copies of the files that we've got. And then we've got recovering devices. And that will be going through some startup troubleshooting and the various troubleshooting tools that we have to recover from operating system failures. We'll start with device drivers. What is a device driver? I think it's been identified already at some point, at least briefly, but it's a small piece of software, small program that's installed along with a hardware device. Its primary purpose is to allow the operating system to communicate with that hardware. And so it gets installed as a part of the device setup, often automatically. Windows 10 has tens of thousands of device drivers included in it. And so the vast majority of the devices, when you plug them in, they will be detected via plug and play. And if assuming a driver is available either in the OS or on Windows Update, it'll automatically install that driver and you'll be using the piece of hardware within seconds. We're very much, well beyond any question about plug and play. The vast majority of devices are either internal in that you would plug them in and the system is then started back up and it detects it, or they plug in via USB. And USB is, of course, a plug and play technology. Everything that uses USB would be plug and play. Some basics about device drivers. I believe we talked about this when we were speaking of installation or the operating system. I mean, there are 32-bit and 64-bit device drivers. They cannot be used, on one another. So you have to have the appropriate device driver for your devices. These drivers are going to be digitally signed by Microsoft, and that digital signature or digital signing is enforced by the operating system. So what that means is that Microsoft has tested those device drivers on Windows 10 and they've approved them for use. They've approved that they work, and so they put their digital signature, that's a little hash value, on the driver itself. And that tells you, number one, that it's been tested and approved by Microsoft, but it also tells you that it hasn't been altered, because altering the device driver, any of the code inside that program, would invalidate that digital signature. We have driver stores and driver packages. The driver store is a single location. I said stores, plural, but it's a single location on the computer where administrators can preload device drivers if necessary. This would only be necessary if the device driver that you have is not included in Windows and is not available via Windows Update. But you might run into some specialty devices and things at particular businesses and this be required. It should be the exception rather than the rule, but by preloading a device, a driver into the store, you can make sure it's available. Having said that, there is one other reason to do it. By preloading drivers into the store, you actually can give users, regular users, the ability to connect that particular device and install the driver. Okay? They won't be able to do that without administrative permissions. And so if you weren't to do that. And what goes into the driver store are simply driver packages, which is the device driver itself, and then some files that have additional metadata, additional information about that device driver. Plug-and-play devices mean that the device is connected and it's automatically detected and the device drivers will install. Windows 10 improves plug-and-play experience in that it detects nearby devices on the network. Okay, so the other, a little while ago we went through and we were looking at printers, and when I opened up the devices and printers, I had 5 or 6 printers in there already. I had forgotten and wasn't really even expecting that, but those are devices on the local network, that we're connected to here. Also, you can install apps from the Windows Store automatically. Some devices will come with apps. Right now, that appears to be few and far between, but now that we're fully in the modern app age, Windows 8 is gone. Well, not gone, but we've gone past Windows 8 to Windows 10. Microsoft is still on this. If Windows 10 and Microsoft in general continues to be as popular of an operating system as it has been, then we're going to have a lot of developers that are writing apps. So what you're going to start seeing is the application for your video card is a Windows Store app. And if that's the case, if a driver has associated apps in the Windows Store, they will be installed automatically. You also have the provision of an enhanced user experience using that driver store that I just mentioned. So the driver store, devices staged there by administrators, means standard users can install with drivers in the store. You can do this, for one of two reasons. One would be the drivers aren't available elsewhere. The other would be I actually have users installing devices and they have then a need for administrative privileges. I still think this is the exception rather than the rule, just because it's been my experience. And I mean, I don't know how often we have users connecting new devices and things to their computers. And I think if they did, we would be talking about flash drives or something related to USB, and and stuff would be loaded automatically for them, or they would get an administrator to help them. But this is here. Microsoft wants us to know about it. You may see this on the exam. Additional paths can be added by administrators using the device path registry entry that basically is used to point to network locations where more driver packages could be stored. There is a Microsoft plug-and-play utility that has existed for quite a while. That's PNP Util. That is the utility that's used to manage the driver store. You can add packages, view packages, remove packages. You do need to run this in an elevated either command prompt or PowerShell window. And then there are other management tools. I mentioned the device apps. Of course, the traditional utility has always been Device Manager. You can get into Device Manager and see the currently installed devices, work with device drivers, load, unload, disable, those kinds of things. And then Devices and Printers is sort of the next evolution of Device Manager. You can go in there and see properties of all your devices and get access to Device Stage, which was that special window that might have some system-specific information about a particular driver. And then, of course, we have the Settings app as well that's going to give you some management of your hardware. All right, so let's take a look at some of these utilities. We'll start with Device Manager. You can right-click and get into Device Manager. That's the quickest way. This has always been just a layout of the devices that you currently have on the system. Okay, sometimes if you have a device on the system that is not showing up correctly, it's because there's a device driver issue. And so you can right-click a device and try to update driver software and search automatically and see if there is new software for a particular device. And we could do that if we were having a problem with a device as well. I don't think there is anything new for that because we actually just downloaded an update for it. So you can go and expand. It will automatically show you devices that are having a problem. They will either have red X's if they've been disabled or removed. They'll have a yellow question mark if they have a device driver issue. They can sometimes show up as unknown devices. You can change your view. We can view resources. We can view resources by connection or type. We can view devices by connection. Okay, and so that just changes the way that this is laid out. But you're just looking for areas that might be a problem. Okay, Devices and Printers is in the Control Panel Hardware and Sound area. And so we've got various things that will show up. Here's my monitor. When you right-click, the nice thing about this one is it's more intuitive than Device Manager. When you right-click this, there's a link to display settings, to the screen resolution. Okay, well that'd be something that is associated with the monitor. When you right-click this is a reference to the computer. When you right-click that, then you have all kinds of options, including a troubleshoot. We go to the properties. That's just going to open up the general properties, but then we can go to hardware and see that. Here's my memory, my USB stick, so there's not going to be anything special on that, but you do have a couple of device-specific context menus, right? And then the keyboard. So when we right-click this, we got mouse settings, keyboard settings, region of language. You can go to the properties and see if it's working, and it'll show you all the related hardware. That's a USB and a wireless keyboard with a USB connector. And then, of course, you got the printers down here, and this is where you could go to add a device, but that's not going to be necessary because I don't need to add a device. All I'm going to do is connect the device. So unless it was a wireless device, you really wouldn't need to go through that. And then I know when we were looking at the printers, we saw the device stage. I don't have anything else that would show up. Phones might show up, media players might show up, cameras often will show up and have their own device stage. It's really all about the manufacturer. Did the manufacturer add additional information into the device driver for this device stage? The first version that did this was Windows 7, and so a lot of them have indeed come along, okay? So let's right-click here, open up PowerShell. We already have that, no. Actually, let's open up just the command prompt. Run that as an administrator and just show you the PNP util command, okay? I would look at this, just get familiar. It just seems to be a popular one for Microsoft to ask about. You might use it in real life, you might not, but that doesn't necessarily relate to the fact that or to the likelihood of it showing up on the test. It's just how it is. So A-A would add a package to the driver store. -E would enumerate all the packages in the store. D for delete. With F, it's a force delete. Add and install a driver package. So A, E, and D are probably your big ones. The PNP utility, as I said, is just your way of interacting with that driver store. Okay, so those are going to be your primary utilities, primary management tools at least. And we'll talk about some of the tasks that we might have to perform in relation to device drivers. One of the tasks in relation to device drivers is going to be the updating of device drivers. There are new drivers that are released, and often they add functionality. They might enhance device security. They really should be installed as quickly as possible. I gotta be honest, I have not always done that myself. I'm kind of, sometimes I've operated on the if it's not broken, don't fix it with device drivers. But unless you're really investigating what the device driver is addressing, then your actual kind of default action ought to be just go ahead and download and install. Especially if it's coming through Windows Update, just go ahead and let it install. And, unless you go and investigate and you realize, okay, this is some feature enhancement that I just don't need, and that's all it's doing, that would be about the only reason not to install a device driver update. Because they might be fixing vulnerabilities, errors in the code that make the device more vulnerable or cause it to not perform as efficiently. So if you're not going to install them, definitely research them. Typically, this comes through Dynamic Update, works with Windows Update for critical updates, and device drivers will automatically get downloaded and installed. You can go to the manufacturer's website. Often we go there just to get more information about a particular driver update and what it is addressing. If a driver is not signed by Microsoft, which it's more and more uncommon these days, really, really rare, it seems. But if it's not signed by Microsoft, then the only place to download it would be from the manufacturer's website. And that's because it's not going to be included on Windows Update because the company is not working with Microsoft in that respect. You can go into Device Manager and do what I just did, and that was forcibly, do a manual update. And your compatibility report when you're going to upgrade, if it identifies any devices that aren't digitally signed that it thinks are going to have problems, then you're going to get a report on the fact that those devices might not work. Again, I've done a number of installations on a few different systems already of Windows 10, and I've never seen any devices pop up. That doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. It's just, it really seems like we've gotten to the point in Windows where there are so many device drivers in Windows already, and there are so many manufacturers that are working with Microsoft that this driver signature problem is just less of an issue now. Now, drivers run with system-level privileges and how they interact with the operating system. They have high levels of access, so the integrity of the device driver is important. And so that's why this driver signature verification is enabled by default, because it verifies the authenticity of the driver, it verifies the integrity, that it hasn't been modified. It just results in improved security, reduction in support scenarios due to bad drivers, and a better overall experience. It's almost a moot point, but it's on by default, and you should leave it on by default. And if you encounter a driver that's not signed, as I said, I haven't yet, if you encounter that for Windows 10, then you address that situation appropriately, and that's it depends on how much you trust the manufacturer. You essentially have one of two options. You can ignore the fact that driver signing is required, and you can say, oh, this one's okay, and keep using the device, or you can go get a new device that's doing the same thing but has a digital signature on it. So it's not as if you can. It's not as if you have a whole bunch of choices. It's either use the device as is or get a replacement device. So let's go back into Device Manager. We had done a manual, update, but you have other options for devices. And over on the driver tab, we do have the ability to do a manual update here. So I can browse a computer if I've downloaded it from the manufacturer, or I can search online. I don't know why I hit that again. We'll cancel out of that, maybe. You can also see the details of the driver. Okay, so just the particulars on the files. It's not usually overly important, but if you want to go in and look at the DLLs that are included there, you can disable and uninstall the driver if you want, and you can also, in some cases, do a rollback. Let's see. Try to find my audio. And I'm not going to roll them back anyway, but if you've got a driver that has been modified and you have updated it, then you are able to roll back the driver. It's like a system restore for that particular device driver. And so you do have that capability. Only do that if you're having a problem with a device. If I've installed a device driver and then maybe I've restarted and I'm having trouble using the device, or maybe it's causing a problem at startup, then I can go in to Device Manager and roll back that driver. And so then it goes back to the previously saved version of the driver, and that should be sufficient. Okay. Again, they would be identified in here as having a problem if indeed they had a problem. But then you can go and do that rollback. So you can work with device drivers in Device Manager primarily. They will come down through Windows Update. In an enterprise environment, I might be using the PNP util as well to work with the driver store.